Did you know that the average church in America loses 18% of its members every single year? And here's what's shocking. Research shows that it takes 10 new visitors to gain one new regular attendee, which means your 100-person church doesn't need 18 new visitors. You actually need 180. That means we need over 3 new visitors every single Sunday, not to grow the church, but to stay the same and replace those that will naturally drift away. If your church isn't growing, don't get caught up in thinking that it's because your worship necessarily isn't good enough or your children's ministry needs an overhaul. All that may be true. In reality, it's because you, like so many other church leaders, probably bought into and believe the visitor acquisition myth. In the next few minutes, I'm gonna break down this barrier for you in detail and show you the exact recipe that I've seen other churches use, mine included, to bust through this barrier and double the number of visitors that we've seen in only 6 months' time. Let's do this. Well, hey guys, I'm Thomas here from Reach Right, and we put out new content like this every single week. So if this is helpful for you as a church leader, it would mean a lot to me if you would hit that subscribe button. And let me know down in the comments, how many visitors do you see at your church on a typical Sunday? I find that when I share that number, that 18% of people will leave your church in a year if you're an average church, that usually surprises pastors. But in reality, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, sure, you're gonna have some people that are leaving your church for reasons that you wish they wouldn't leave it, but there's just a lot of natural transition, and I'd say for most churches, some of that is healthy. It's people leaving town to go to a new job, or maybe somebody gets married and their spouse goes to a different church, or, frankly, people pass away within our churches, and that's just a normal part of life. You're always gonna have people leaving your church, and that's just a reality, but there are new people that are desperate for the gospel that are right there waiting to visit your church. Let's face it, most of us don't set out in the beginning of the year and set goals to stay the same size. Usually we have goals to see our church grow. My church, for instance, where we have about 300 people on a typical Sunday, we're gonna lose about 50 people every single year. So that means we need 500 people coming through our doors. That's over 10 people every single week just to stay the same size. But if I'm being real with you for a second, our goal isn't to be the same size this year that we were last year. We wanna see more people walk through our doors and more people give their life to Jesus and more people get baptized. And that's really what we set out to do. So at the beginning of the year, we believe for God to add 50 people to our normal typical attendance. So to get those kinds of numbers, that means we're gonna have to see 20 new visitors every single week walk through our doors to have a realistic shot of seeing our church grow by 50 people this year. Now, one of the biggest traps I see so many church leaders fall into is they make this assumption that every visitor that walks through our doors is gonna love us, they're gonna fall in love with our preaching, they're gonna love our worship team, they're gonna come to our starting point class and get involved, and the reality is that's just not the case. Realistically, we have to plan for the fact that we will need a lot more visitors than we probably are seeing if we want to see our church grow. So how do we get there? I think it starts with us identifying the problem first. Why do we have fewer visitors than maybe we used to have at one point in our church? And I usually see churches fall into one or more of 3 different areas where we're missing the mark when it comes to number of visitors. Now, the first one is what I call just kind of community invisibility. We kind of operate under this assumption that everybody knows where we are. We're here, we've been here for years, they see our sign, but in reality, you'll probably have to come to terms with the fact that most people aren't really aware of you. I walk through this exercise with a lot of the churches that I consult. If I were to ask an average person in your community, tell me, what do you know about First Baptist Church, or whatever the name of your church is, what would they say? The reality is that most people, especially those that aren't Christians, don't have any idea that your church even exists, and you need to do something to fix that. Secondly, I see an invitation deficit at a lot of churches. Sadly, I see a lot of pastors take on that responsibility of being the chief inviters to your church, when really it was never an assignment that pastors were supposed to have all by themselves. The people within your church are the best resource when it comes to reaching your community, because they have direct access to people that you do not have access to as the pastor of your church. If every single person in your church took responsibility, invited, and brought one person to church per year, you would probably have enough visitors to get pretty close to that replacement rate. If they brought 2 people per year, you would be a growing church. That's just what the math seems to show. But sadly, a recent study showed that only 2% of people that identify as Christians have invited someone to church in the last year. 2%, that's 1 out of 50 people. If only 1 out of 50 of our people are inviting people, there is a major crack in the system. Churches need to cultivate that inviting culture if they want to see real growth and see more visitors. And the third problem I see that so many churches fall into is a measurement problem. And frankly, it's more of a non-measurement problem. Sometimes we get so caught up in not wanting to be all about the numbers that we forget that numbers actually matter. I was actually reading this week in Acts chapter 2, where Peter is preaching on the day of Pentecost up in the upper room, and people were hearing the gospel in their own languages. And it's very clear to point out that 3,000 people were added to their number that day. That, in my view, means that the disciples were counting. They were counting people. They were measuring to see how many people were to be counted among the people that were following Jesus. If you want to get serious about reaching more people, you have to know some of your key metrics. Specifically, how many people are visiting your church, how many people consider themselves attenders of your church, how many are maybe the next level of members or leaders, and how many people are with you on a typical Sunday. Those 4 numbers are really vital to understand. Now, are they the only numbers? Absolutely not. And I am all for measuring more qualitative type of numbers like baptisms and discipleship numbers, but these are also important numbers, and we know that because we see these numbers counted in Scripture. So what is the church to do? You've identified the problem. You want to see your church grow. How do you break through these barriers? Well, the first thing I would encourage you to do is to pivot and create an inviting culture. And there's really no way to do this other than just coming out and saying it. You have to encourage your people to be thinking about who they are inviting and praying for people in their lives that they can invite. We recently wrapped up all of our Easter events at our church here, and part of our strategy this year was to encourage our people to be inviting their friends and neighbors. We started about 6 weeks ago, and in our service time, we had our members pray for people that God was putting on their hearts to invite on Easter Sunday. That started to build an expectation for them to look for opportunities and have conversations that may allow them to be able to step into their neighbors' lives and invite them on a Sunday. Now, we caution them to not do it just for numbers' sake, but to actually care about their neighbors, and that is so important. People can sniff out ulterior motives pretty far away, so you want to be careful with that, but have people start praying for their friends and family and coworkers and neighbors well in advance and encourage them to be inviting. Also, I'd encourage you to give people resources that they can use to help with that invitation process. We made little circle cards that people could easily hand out to neighbors, and we give business card size invitations to all of our life group leaders at our church, but giving people some kind of resource is a great tool. Finally, work on a series of social media posts that people within your church can maybe share to let people know about big events your church is having, or maybe that are really shareable to help them introduce your church to their friends and family. In the end, remember, the people of your church desperately want to see their friends and family and coworkers, neighbors come to faith in Christ. And they're just looking for the tools, the resources, and in a lot of cases, the training on how to do so effectively. After you've started building an invitation culture, I'd say the next step is working on your church's digital front door strategy. And I want to emphasize that word digital. I think your best opportunities for introducing your community to your church are going to happen online. The days of doing newspaper ads and TV commercials and even direct mail, I think, are kind of behind us at this point. Your best bet is to start off with your church's website. Can I just confess to you that I don't get involved with any organization until I've checked them out online. This goes for something as simple as where I'm going to choose to eat dinner or who I'm going to hire to fix a leak in my faucet, and it definitely applies to a church that I want to take my family to and people that I want to trust and invite into my life. You need to make sure your church's web presence is top-notch, because people will make judgments, whether we like it or not, on the quality of our ministry based on what they see online. Now, unfortunately, just building a website doesn't cut it, because you could build a website, but the fact is that no one will ever find it or get onto it unless you're finding ways to drive people there. And we've uncovered a few ways that work better than others in getting more people onto your church's website. The first thing is I would absolutely take advantage of the Google Ad Grant. Google gives nonprofits, including churches, $10,000 every single month in free ads that you can use to drive people looking for churches, but also looking for all kinds of spiritual help. You can drive them to your church and engage with them on your website. Most churches are eligible for this grant, but I'm gonna leave a link down in the description that'll show you with a grant eligibility checker whether your church qualifies or not. We actually have another tool that I recommend you try out that will show you exactly where your church ranks in local searches. Now, you could just type in churches near me and see where you rank, but this will give you a lot more detail. It'll show you exactly where you rank in each part of town, and it'll show you what you can do to make some improvement today. I'll leave a link to that in the description as well. Finally, you really ought to get serious about social media. It is one of the most powerful tools to introduce your church to more people, and the best way to do that right now is through Reels or Shorts or through TikTok. And I'll just say this, the things that used to work on Facebook and Instagram, they frankly just don't work the way that they used to anymore. If you're not using Reels, you're probably missing out. Some of your content can be repurposed sermon content. That always is a home run. But I think more organic content is really solid too. We've had a lot of success at our church just filming people in worship and people being baptized. And that can be really powerful, especially when it's set to music. And we've seen good results of that attracting more people to walk in the doors of your church. Now, I want to end with this. Maybe you've got this far and I've made you pretty angry. You're thinking to yourself, Thomas, why would I go through all this work? Because I don't have any power to grow my church. Jesus is the one that does it. And I couldn't agree with you more. It's very clear to me that Jesus himself says, I will build my church. I love that God invites us as leaders in his church to play a part in him being the one that builds his church. In fact, I see it more as a question of stewardship. Our assignment is to be good stewards because in the end, when we are faithful with the little, we know God promises that we'll be given much. So thank you, pastors, for what you do, the way you lay yourselves out there day in and day out. We know that you're working hard at this. I hope this video has been a help. And if it has, this is the next video that you should watch. In it, I do a deep dive of exactly how I would market a church using the tools that we have at our disposal to reach our community with the gospel.